Billionaire watches a black reverend sister secretly stealing in the grocery store. What he does next left everyone speechless. Sister Maria's trembling hand slipped the can of soup into her worn cloth bag, unaware that the man in the expensive suit 3 aisles over was watching her every move, and about to change both their lives forever. Before we get deep into the story, please let me know in the comment where you're watching from. Hit subscribe if you're hooked in and ready to enjoy the story, because tomorrow, I have another beautiful story to share with you and I don't want you to miss it for anything. You're welcome to Mr. Paul's Stories, where we come together like a warm embrace, sharing the magic of stories that touch our souls. Join me, let us bow our heads in prayer. May our hearts be filled with overflowing love, may our spirits lift with boundless hope and wonder, and may a gentle wave of blessings wrap us in joy, peace, and unity. I pray this story binds us tighter, sparks our dreams, and fills us with the beauty of togetherness. Amen. Now, let's begin today's story. The fluorescent lights of Morrison's grocery cast harsh shadows across the polished floor as Jonathan Blackwood adjusted his platinum watch, a nervous habit he developed since his wife's funeral 6 months ago. At 42, he possessed everything money could buy: a penthouse overlooking the city, a private jet, and a business empire worth billions. Yet he stood in this modest grocery store at 9 p.m., not because he needed anything, but because the silence of his empty mansion had become unbearable. He moved through the aisles with mechanical precision, his Italian leather shoes clicking against the linoleum. The other shoppers kept their distance. His reputation preceded him. Jonathan Blackwood, the Ice King of Wall Street, who'd built his fortune by dismantling companies and crushing competitors without a trace of emotion. Tonight, he wasn't shopping for groceries. He was shopping for a reason to feel human again. 3 aisles over, Sister Maria Gonzalez knelt before the soup section, her weathered hands clasped in silent prayer. At 58, her face bore the lines of someone who'd carried the weight of others' suffering for decades. Her black habit, though meticulously maintained, couldn't hide the frayed edges that spoke of years of faithful service. The food bank at St. Augustine's had been empty for 3 days, and 17 children in her care hadn't eaten a proper meal since Tuesday. She rose slowly, her arthritic knees protesting, and reached for a can of chicken noodle soup. The price tag read $2.49, money she didn't have. Her monthly stipend from the church barely covered the orphanage's utilities, and the diocese had cut their funding again. She glanced around the nearly empty store, her heart hammering against her ribs. "Forgive me, Lord," she whispered, her voice barely audible above the store's muzak. "But they're just children." Her trembling fingers lifted the can, and for a moment, she simply held it, feeling its weight. Inside was nourishment for Miguel, who'd asked if angels got hungry because he was. Inside was hope for little Grace, who'd given her own crackers to the younger kids. Sister Maria had stolen food from her own plate for weeks, but it wasn't enough. She looked toward the front of the store where the teenage cashier was absorbed in her phone, then at the security cameras that seemed to watch everything. Her pulse quickened as she made the decision that would haunt her for the rest of her life. The can disappeared into her cloth bag. Then another. And another. Each theft felt like a knife twisting in her soul, but the faces of 17 hungry children drove her forward. She'd built her entire life on truth, on righteousness, on being an example of moral fortitude. Now, in this fluorescent-lit temple of commerce, she was destroying everything she'd stood for, one stolen can at a time. What she didn't know was that Jonathan Blackwood had been watching her for the past 5 minutes, his initial irritation at her slow shopping pace transforming into something far more complex. He'd noticed her prayer, her hesitation, the way she'd looked around like a frightened animal. And when she'd begun concealing the cans, he'd felt something stir in his chest, something he hadn't felt in years. Not anger. Not judgment. Recognition. Jonathan's footsteps echoed through the nearly empty store as he approached the soup aisle, each step deliberate and measured. Sister Maria had moved to the canned vegetable section, her movements growing more frantic as desperation overrode caution. She didn't hear him coming. Her world had narrowed to the simple arithmetic of survival: 17 children, 3 days without food, and a God who seemed to have forgotten them. "Excuse me, sister." His voice cut through the hum of refrigeration units like a blade. Sister Maria's entire body went rigid, the can of green beans in her hand suddenly feeling like it weighed 1,000 pounds. She turned slowly, her dark eyes wide with terror, meeting the cold blue gaze of a man whose presence radiated power and judgment. Jonathan stood 6 feet away, his charcoal suit immaculate, his expression unreadable. Between them stretched a chasm of class, race, and circumstance that seemed impossible to bridge. The fluorescent lights above cast harsh shadows across his angular face, making him appear even more intimidating than his reputation suggested. I was just... Sister Maria's voice cracked, the words dying in her throat. The can slipped from her trembling fingers, clattering to the floor with a sound that seemed to echo through eternity. "You were just what?" Jonathan's voice was soft, almost gentle, but it carried the weight of someone accustomed to getting answers. He bent down and picked up the can, holding it between them like evidence in a trial. Sister Maria's breathing became shallow, rapid. 40 years of serving God, of being a pillar of strength for her community, and it was all going to end here, in aisle 7 of a grocery store, at the hands of a man who probably spent more on lunch than she saw in a month. "Please," she whispered, her voice breaking. "I can explain." "Can you?" Jonathan stepped closer, and she caught the scent of expensive cologne mixed with something else, something that smelled like loneliness. "Because what I saw looked like stealing." The word hung in the air between them like a physical presence. Sister Maria's shoulders sagged as if the weight of her shame had finally become too much to bear. Tears began to well in her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. She had cried enough over the past months, over the empty pantry, over the children's hollow cheeks, over the prayers that seemed to bounce off the ceiling. "Yes," she said, her voice barely audible. "I was stealing." Have you ever been pushed to do something that went against everything you believed in? Tell us about a moment when desperation made you question your values. Jonathan felt something shift inside his chest, a crack in the armor he'd built around his heart. He had expected denial, excuses, perhaps even anger. He hadn't expected this raw, devastating honesty. The woman before him wasn't some common criminal. She was someone who had been broken by circumstances beyond her control. Why? The question escaped his lips before he could stop it, softer than he'd intended. Sister Maria looked up at him, really looked at him, and for the first time, she saw past the expensive suit and intimidating presence. She saw exhaustion in his eyes, a hollowness that she recognized from her own mirror. This man, for all his wealth and power, was as lost as she was. "Because 17 children in my care haven't eaten a proper meal in 3 days," she said, her voice gaining strength. "Because the food bank is empty, and the diocese cut our funding again. Because Miguel asked me yesterday if angels get hungry, and I didn't know how to answer him." Jonathan's breath caught. The can in his hand suddenly felt heavier. He had expected a sob story, a plea for mercy, but this was something else entirely. This was a mother, not biological, but spiritual, doing what mothers do when their children are in danger. 17 children, he repeated, his voice hollow. 17 children, she confirmed, her chin lifting with a dignity that poverty couldn't steal. "And I would steal 1,000 cans if it meant they could sleep with full bellies tonight." The silence that followed was deafening. Around them, the store continued its mechanical hum, but in their small corner of the world, time seemed suspended. Two people from completely different worlds, united by a moment of brutal honesty that had stripped away all pretense. Jonathan's hand began to shake, barely perceptible, but Sister Maria noticed. She had spent decades counseling the broken, and she recognized the signs of a man at war with himself. His jaw clenched and unclenched, his breathing became irregular, and for just a moment, his carefully constructed mask slipped. "I haven't fed anyone in years," he whispered, more to himself than to her. The admission hung between them like a bridge neither had expected to find. Sister Maria felt her fear beginning to transform into something else, not hope exactly, but recognition. This wasn't just about stolen soup cans anymore. This was about two souls who had lost their way, finding each other in the most unlikely of circumstances. "What's your name?" Jonathan asked suddenly. "Sister Maria Gonzalez," she replied, straightening her shoulders. "And you're Jonathan Blackwood." He nodded, unsurprised that she knew. Everyone in the city knew his name, though usually followed by words like ruthless or heartless. "Well, Sister Maria Gonzalez," he said, his voice carrying a weight she couldn't quite identify, "I think we need to talk." He gestured toward the front of the store, where the teenage cashier was still absorbed in her phone. Sister Maria's eyes darted to her bag, still heavy with stolen goods, then back to his face. "Are you going to turn me in?" she asked, her voice steady despite the fear in her eyes. Jonathan was quiet for a long moment, studying her face. In her weathered features, he saw something he hadn't encountered in years: genuine courage. Not the kind that came from having nothing to lose, but the kind that came from loving something more than yourself. "No," he said finally. "I'm going to do something else entirely." The walk to the front of the store felt like a death march to Sister Maria. Each step echoed her internal struggle, 40 years of moral teaching warring against the desperate love she felt for her children. Jonathan walked beside her, his presence both protective and intimidating, like a storm cloud that could bring either rain or lightning. "Wait here," he said quietly as they approached the checkout counter. Sister Maria watched in bewilderment as Jonathan pulled out his phone and made a call. His voice was too low for her to hear, but she caught fragments. "Need a car. St. Augustine's. 20 minutes. The teenage cashier, whose name tag read Bethany, finally looked up from her phone as Jonathan approached her register. Her eyes widened when she recognized him. Even teenagers knew the face of the city's most feared businessman. "Sir, we're about to close." "I need to buy everything in this woman's bag," Jonathan said, his voice carrying the authority of someone unaccustomed to being questioned. Sister Maria's face flushed with shame and anger. "I don't need your charity," she said, her voice sharp enough to cut glass. "I don't need your pity." Jonathan turned to face her, his expression unreadable. "This isn't charity, sister. This is business." "Business?" She laughed bitterly. "What business could you possibly have with a woman who steals soup?" "The business of understanding," he replied, his voice softer now. "You think I don't know what it's like to be desperate? To make choices that go against everything you believe in?" Sister Maria's eyes flashed with defiance. "You? Desperate? You've never known a day of want in your entire life." "Haven't I?" Jonathan's voice carried an edge of pain that made her pause. "You think wealth protects you from desperation? You think money can buy you peace when you're drowning in guilt?" "Guilt?" Sister Maria's voice rose, drawing a curious glance from Bethany. "What could you possibly have to feel guilty about? You have everything." "I have nothing," Jonathan said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Nothing that matters." The raw honesty in his voice caught Sister Maria off guard. She had expected condescension, superiority, perhaps even cruel amusement. She hadn't expected this glimpse of genuine pain that mirrored her own. But pride, that ancient enemy of grace, reared its head. She had built her entire identity around being the one who helped others, not the one who needed help. The thought of accepting anything from this man, this symbol of everything wrong with the world, made her stomach turn. "I won't be your pet project," she said, her voice trembling with barely controlled emotion. "I won't be the good deed that helps you sleep at night." Jonathan's jaw tightened. "And I won't be your convenient villain. You don't know anything about me." "I know enough," Sister Maria shot back. "I know you built your fortune by destroying lives. I know you put profits over people. I know." "You know nothing," Jonathan interrupted, his voice cold as winter steel. "You know rumors. You know newspaper headlines. You know the comfortable narrative that makes it easy to hate people like me." They stood facing each other like opposing armies, the weight of class conflict and racial tension crackling between them. Bethany shifted uncomfortably behind her register, unsure whether to intervene or hide. "People like you?" Sister Maria's voice carried decades of witnessing inequality. "You mean people who hoard wealth while children starve? People who live in ivory towers while the rest of us struggle to survive?" "I mean people who carry burdens you can't imagine," Jonathan replied, his voice rising. "People who make impossible choices in a world that offers no good options." "Impossible choices?" Sister Maria laughed bitterly. "You want to talk about impossible choices? Try choosing which children get to eat when there's not enough food for everyone. Try explaining to a 7-year-old why God allows suffering. Try maintaining faith when everything around you is falling apart." Jonathan's expression shifted, the anger flickering out of his eyes. "You think I don't know about falling apart?" "I think you know about taking apart," Sister Maria replied, but her voice had lost some of its venom. "I think you know about destruction, not survival." They stood in silence for a moment, both breathing heavily, both wounded by words that had cut deeper than intended. Around them, the store's fluorescent lights hummed their mechanical song, indifferent to the human drama playing out beneath them. Have you ever judged someone without knowing their story? Share a time when your first impression was completely wrong. Jonathan was the first to break the silence. "You're right," he said, his voice hollow. "I do know about destruction. I'm very good at it." Something in his tone made Sister Maria look at him more carefully. The anger was gone, replaced by something that looked almost like defeat. "But I used to know about building things too," he continued. "I used to know about hope, about love, about believing in something bigger than myself." "What happened?" The question slipped out before Sister Maria could stop it. Jonathan's smile was bitter. "Life happened. Loss happened. I learned that the world doesn't reward goodness, sister. It rewards strength. It rewards the willingness to do what others won't. And now I'm standing in a grocery store at 9:30 at night, trying to remember what it felt like to care about something other than winning." Sister Maria felt her defenses wavering. She had expected a monster, but the man before her seemed more like a wounded animal, dangerous, yes, but also deeply hurt. "I still can't accept your help," she said quietly. "Not like this. Not as charity." "Then don't," Jonathan replied. "Accept it as payment." "Payment for what?" Jonathan was quiet for a long moment, his eyes distant. "For reminding me that there are still people in this world who choose love over logic, who choose sacrifice over safety, who choose to believe in something greater than themselves." "I'm not sure I believe in anything anymore," Sister Maria admitted, her voice barely audible. "Then we're both lost," Jonathan said. "The question is, are we going to stay lost, or are we going to try to find our way back together?" Outside, the sound of a car pulling up broke the spell. Jonathan glanced toward the window, then back at Sister Maria. "That's our ride," he said. "To the orphanage. To see these 17 children you're willing to steal for." Sister Maria's eyes widened. "You want to come to St. Augustine's?" "I want to understand," Jonathan replied. "I want to see what's worth risking everything for." "And if I say no?" "Then I'll pay for your groceries, and we'll pretend this never happened. But I don't think that's what either of us needs right now." Sister Maria looked at him for a long moment, seeing past the expensive suit and intimidating presence to the broken man beneath. She thought of Miguel's question about hungry angels, of Grace's generous spirit, of 17 children who needed to see that miracles were still possible. "The children will be asleep," she said finally. "Then we'll be quiet," Jonathan replied. Sister Maria nodded slowly, decision made. "All right, Mr. Blackwood. But you should know, St. Augustine's isn't like anywhere you've ever been." "Good," Jonathan said, surprising her. "I'm tired of places like everywhere I've been." The rain had started as a gentle mist when they left the grocery store, but by the time Jonathan's black Mercedes pulled up to St. Augustine's orphanage, it had transformed into a torrential downpour. The windshield wipers struggled against the deluge as they sat in the car, an uncomfortable silence stretching between them. Sister Maria clutched the grocery bags, now legitimately purchased thanks to Jonathan's credit card, like a lifeline. The past hour had been a whirlwind of confusion and unexpected kindness. After their confrontation in the store, Jonathan had quietly paid for not just the item she'd taken, but enough groceries to feed the children for a week. He'd insisted on driving her home, though she suspected it had more to do with his reluctance to return to his empty mansion than any concern for her safety. "This is it," she said softly, nodding toward the modest brick building that had been her home for the past 15 years. Even in the rain, it looked tired, paint peeling from the window frames, a few shingles missing from the roof, a chain-link fence that had seen better days. Jonathan stared at the building, his hands gripping the steering wheel. He'd driven past this neighborhood countless times on his way to board meetings, but he'd never really seen it. The contrast between this place and his penthouse felt like a chasm between two different worlds. "The children are probably asleep," Sister Maria said, breaking the silence. "It's past 9. "Probably," Jonathan agreed, but he made no move to unlock the doors. Thunder rolled overhead, and a flash of lightning illuminated the orphanage's front yard. In that brief moment, Jonathan saw a small face pressed against one of the windows, a child who should have been asleep but was instead watching the rain with wide, curious eyes. "Miguel," Sister Maria whispered, following his gaze. "He's afraid of storms." Something twisted in Jonathan's chest. He remembered being afraid of storms once, long ago, before he'd learned that the real monsters weren't in the thunder, but in the silence that followed. What do you think drives someone to open their heart to a stranger? Share a moment when unexpected kindness changed your perspective. "I should go," Sister Maria said, reaching for the door handle. "Wait." The word escaped Jonathan's lips before he could stop it. "The storm, it's getting worse." As if summoned by his words, a violent crack of thunder shook the car. The power flickered in the orphanage, and they could see the children's faces appearing at various windows, 17 little silhouettes seeking comfort in the storm. "They're scared," Sister Maria said, her voice tight with concern. "I need to get to them." "You'll be soaked before you reach the door," Jonathan observed, though they both knew that wasn't really why he'd asked her to wait. Sister Maria studied his face in the dim light from the dashboard. This man who commanded boardrooms and controlled billions seemed suddenly vulnerable, almost childlike in his reluctance to be alone. "You could come in," she said quietly. "Just until the storm passes." Jonathan's first instinct was to refuse. He didn't belong in a place like this, surrounded by children and chaos and the kind of raw need that made him uncomfortable. But as another flash of lightning illuminated the orphanage, he saw more faces at the windows, children who were awake because they were afraid, just like he used to be. "I wouldn't want to impose," he said, but his voice lacked conviction. "Mr. Blackwood," Sister Maria said, her tone gentle but firm, "when was the last time you were somewhere that wasn't trying to impress you or take something from you?" The question hit him like a physical blow. He couldn't remember. His penthouse, his office, his country club, every space in his life was designed to project power and success. Even his wife's funeral had been a carefully orchestrated display of wealth and status. "I can't remember," he admitted. "Then come in," she said. "Not because you're Jonathan Blackwood, the billionaire, but because you're a person caught in a storm." They ran through the rain together, Jonathan's expensive suit getting soaked as he helped Sister Maria carry the grocery bags. By the time they reached the front door, they were both laughing, a sound that surprised them both with its spontaneity. The orphanage's interior was a stark contrast to the luxury Jonathan was accustomed to. The walls were painted in cheerful but faded colors, decorated with children's artwork and handmade inspirational posters. The furniture was mismatched but clean, and everything carried the subtle scent of industrial disinfectant mixed with something warmer, home-cooked meals and childhood dreams. "Sister Maria." A small voice called from the stairway. Miguel, a 7-year-old boy with dark hair and enormous eyes, came running down the steps despite the late hour. The thunder is so loud. I know, Mijo, Sister Maria said, dropping to her knees to embrace him. But we're safe inside. Miguel's eyes found Jonathan, and he stared with the unabashed curiosity of childhood. Who's the tall man? This is Mr. Blackwood, Sister Maria said. He helped us get groceries tonight. Are you rich? Miguel asked with the blunt honesty that only children possess. Jonathan felt his carefully constructed walls beginning to crumble. Yes, I suppose I am. That's good, Miguel said matter-of-factly. Rich people can help lots of people. The simple statement hung in the air like a challenge. Jonathan realized he was standing in a place where his wealth, the thing that defined him, protected him, isolated him, was being viewed through the lens of a child's innocent logic. Not as power or status, but as potential for good. More children began appearing, drawn by curiosity about their late-night visitor and seeking comfort from the storm. Soon, Jonathan found himself surrounded by 17 pairs of eyes, each representing a story of loss, hope, and resilience that he was only beginning to understand. Why don't you all sit with us until the storm passes? Sister Maria suggested, gesturing toward the common room where a collection of worn couches and chairs formed a cozy circle. As they settled in, Jonathan found himself in the middle of a scene he'd never experienced. Children chattering softly, sharing stories about their day, seeking comfort in community. The storm raged outside, but inside this modest building, there was a warmth that his penthouse had never known. Mr. Blackwood, a girl named Grace asked, "Do you have children?" The question struck him like lightning. "No," he said quietly. "My wife and we never had children." "That's sad," Grace said with devastating simplicity. "Everyone should have children to love." Jonathan felt something break inside him, not painfully, but like ice melting in spring. These children, who had been abandoned or orphaned, who had every reason to be bitter about the absence of parents, were offering him sympathy for his childlessness. As the storm continued outside, Jonathan found himself trapped, not by the weather, but by the realization that for the first time in years, he was exactly where he needed to be. The rain had intensified, drumming against the windows of the small office behind St. Augustine's chapel with a rhythm that seemed to echo the beating of two wounded hearts. Sister Maria sat across from Jonathan, her hands wrapped around a cup of tea that had long since grown cold. Between them lay the weight of unspoken histories, the kind of pain that shapes souls and determines destinies. "You asked me about the children," Sister Maria said, her voice barely above a whisper. "But you didn't ask me about the one I lost." Jonathan's breath caught. Something in her tone, a particular quality of grief that he recognized, made his chest tighten. Lost. Sister Maria's eyes drifted to a small framed photograph on her desk. In it, a young girl with bright eyes and pigtails smiled back at them, her face radiant with a kind of joy that only children possess. Her name was Isabella. She was 8 years old. The words hung in the air like a prayer. Jonathan found himself leaning forward, drawn by the raw vulnerability in her voice. This was the story she'd never told, the wound that had never quite healed. "She wasn't technically mine," Sister Maria continued, her fingers tracing the edge of the photograph. "I was just 25 then, fresh out of the convent, assigned to work at a children's hospital in Guatemala. Isabella had been abandoned there as a baby, born with a heart defect that required surgery her family couldn't afford." Jonathan felt something cold settle in his stomach. He'd heard stories like this before, in board meetings and charity galas, but always from a distance. Always as statistics. Never as the living, breathing truth of someone sitting across from him. "I spent 3 years fighting for her," Sister Maria's voice cracked. "Fighting the system, fighting the doctors who said she was too sick, fighting the adoption agencies who said no one would want a child with her condition. But Isabella, she was light itself. She would sing hymns in Spanish while she was in pain, and she would hold my hand and tell me that God had sent me to be her guardian angel." Have you ever fought for someone who couldn't fight for themselves? Share a story about standing up for those who need it most. The tears came then, unstoppable and years in the making. I had the surgery scheduled. I had found a family in America who wanted to adopt her. I had the funds raised through the church. Everything was ready. And then... She couldn't finish. The words were trapped somewhere between her heart and her throat, too heavy to lift, too painful to release. Jonathan's hands had begun to shake. Not from cold, but from recognition. He knew this story. Not the details, but the shape of it. The contours of love and loss that defined a life. Then what? He asked, though part of him already knew. She died the night before the surgery, Sister Maria whispered. A simple infection that her weakened body couldn't fight. I was holding her hand when she passed. Her last words were, "Hermana Maria, will you take care of the other children when I'm gone?" The silence that followed was deafening. Outside, the rain continued its relentless rhythm, but inside the small office, time seemed to have stopped entirely. Jonathan stared at the photograph, at the little girl's bright eyes, and felt something break open inside his chest. "That's why you became a nun," he said, his voice hoarse with understanding. "That's why I became everything I am," she replied. "Every child I've cared for since then has been Isabella. Every hungry belly, every frightened face, every night I've stayed awake worrying about where the next meal would come from, it's all been for her." Jonathan stood abruptly, walking to the window where the rain streaked the glass like tears. His reflection stared back at him, a successful man in an expensive suit, but his eyes held the same haunted quality as Sister Maria's. "I had a daughter once," he said, his voice so quiet she had to strain to hear it. Sister Maria's breath caught. In all her years of counseling the broken, she had learned to recognize the particular timbre of parental grief. It was unmistakable, devastating, and it was pouring out of Jonathan Blackwood like water from a broken dam. "Her name was Emma," he continued, his forehead pressed against the cool glass. "She was 6 years old. Blonde hair, blue eyes, and this laugh that could light up an entire room. She used to wait for me by the window every night, even when I came home late from work. She'd run to the door and jump into my arms like I was her hero." His voice broke on the last word, and Sister Maria felt her own tears begin to fall again. Two strangers, united by the particular agony of loving a child who was no longer there to be loved. What happened to her? Sister Maria asked, though she wasn't sure she wanted to know. Jonathan turned from the window, his face streaked with tears he didn't bother to hide. "Leukemia. We fought it for 2 years. The best doctors, the most expensive treatments, private hospitals, experimental therapies. I threw money at it like money could cure everything. Like my wealth could buy her more time." He sank back into his chair, suddenly looking older than his 42 years. "But money can't buy miracles, sister. It can't buy back the bedtime stories I missed because I was working. It can't buy back the dance recitals I skipped for board meetings. It can't buy back the last 3 months of her life, when she kept asking why Daddy wasn't there more." The rain seemed to intensify, as if the heavens themselves were weeping for the children who had been lost, the parents who had been left behind, and the love that had nowhere to go. "She died holding my wife's hand," Jonathan whispered. "I was in Tokyo, closing a deal that seemed so important at the time. I got the call at 3 a.m. "Mr. Blackwood, you need to come home. Emma's gone." Sister Maria reached across the desk and took his hand. It was an instinctive gesture, the kind she'd performed thousands of times with grieving families, but this time it felt different. This time, she was giving comfort to someone who understood her pain in a way that no one else ever had. "My wife never forgave me," Jonathan continued. "She said I chose money over our daughter. That I was more committed to building an empire than to being a father. She was right. Catherine died 6 months ago, cancer, and her last words to me were, 'I hope you're proud of your success, Jonathan. I hope it keeps you warm at night.'" The weight of his confession settled between them like a stone. Two people who had dedicated their lives to different purposes, one to serving God, one to building wealth, but both had been shaped by the same fundamental loss, the death of a child they had loved more than life itself. "Is that why you were in the store tonight?" Sister Maria asked softly, because the silence was too much. Jonathan nodded, unable to speak. The truth was too raw, too fresh, too devastating to put into words. He had been running from his grief for 6 months, throwing himself into work, into deals, into anything that would keep him from facing the empty rooms and silent corners of his life. "I see her everywhere," he whispered. "In every little girl, in every laugh, in every moment of joy that I'm not part of. And when I saw you tonight, stealing food for children who needed it, I saw what I should have been. A parent who would do anything for their child." Sister Maria squeezed his hand tighter. "You were a good father, Jonathan. Grief doesn't erase love." "Was I?" he asked, his voice breaking. "Because I keep thinking about all the ways I failed her, all the moments I missed, all the times I chose everything else over her." "Love isn't measured in hours," Sister Maria said, her voice steady despite her own tears. "It's measured in the depth of our caring. And I can see in your eyes that you loved her completely." They sat in silence, two broken souls finding unexpected solace in shared pain. Outside, the storm raged on, but inside the small office, something had shifted. The walls they had built around their hearts had begun to crumble, not from attack, but from the simple recognition that they were not alone in their suffering. "What do we do now?" Jonathan asked finally. Sister Maria looked at the photograph of Isabella, then at the man across from her who had lost his Emma, and felt something stir in her chest that she hadn't experienced in years. "Hope. Now," she said, her voice gaining strength, "we help each other heal." The rain had stopped by the time they reached St. Augustine's, but the world still glistened with moisture that caught the streetlights like scattered diamonds. Jonathan's Mercedes looked impossibly out of place in the orphanage's modest parking lot, its polished surface reflecting the warm glow spilling from the building's windows. Sister Maria paused at the front door, her hand resting on the worn brass handle. "Mr. Blackwood, I need you to understand something before we go in. These children, they've been hurt before. By people who made promises they couldn't keep, by a system that failed them. They're going to be suspicious of you." Jonathan nodded, his throat tight. Through the windows, he could see small figures moving about, children who had no idea their lives were about to change. "What should I do?" "Just be yourself," she said, then caught herself. "Actually, be the person I think you used to be. Before life made you hard." The comment should have stung, but instead, it felt like an invitation. When was the last time someone had seen past his reputation to the man underneath? When was the last time someone had believed he could be better than he was? They entered together, and immediately the space came alive with the sound of children's voices. The common room was modest but warm, with mismatched furniture and walls covered in crayon drawings. 17 faces turned toward them, some curious, some wary, all beautiful in their resilience. Sister Maria. A small boy with dark hair and enormous eyes launched himself at her legs. This was Miguel, the one who had asked if angels got hungry. "Did you bring food?" "I did, Mijo," she said, her voice thick with emotion as she stroked his hair. "But first, I want you to meet someone. This is Mr. Blackwood." The children's reactions were immediate and varied. The older ones stepped back instinctively. They had learned to be cautious around well-dressed strangers. The younger one simply stared, taking in his expensive suit and perfectly styled hair as if he were a creature from another planet. "Are you a prince?" asked a little girl with pigtails, her voice filled with wonder. Jonathan knelt down to her level, his movements careful and deliberate. "No, sweetheart. I'm just a man who's learning how to be better." What do you think children can teach adults about seeing people for who they really are? Share a moment when a child's perspective changed how you saw the world. Over the next hour, something miraculous happened. The barriers that wealth and status had built around Jonathan began to crumble, piece by piece. He found himself sitting cross-legged on the floor, listening to Grace read from a picture book about a lonely dragon who found friendship. He helped Carlos with his math homework, discovering that the boy had a brilliant mind trapped in circumstances beyond his control. "You're really good at this," Sister Maria observed, watching him patiently explain fractions to a group of eager students. "I used to tutor kids when I was in college," Jonathan admitted, his voice soft. "I'd forgotten how much I enjoyed it." "What made you stop?" He was quiet for a moment, his hand stilling on the worksheet. "Success, I guess. The more money I made, the less time I had for things that mattered. I told myself I was building something important, but I think I was just building walls." Sister Maria sat beside him on the worn carpet, her presence a comfort he hadn't expected. It's never too late to tear them down. As the evening progressed, Jonathan found himself sharing stories from his own childhood, carefully edited versions that focused on wonder rather than privilege. He told them about the time he tried to teach his pet hamster to play chess, about the treehouse he built that had collapsed spectacularly, about the way his grandmother had made the best chocolate chip cookies in the world. "Do you have any kids?" asked Elena, a thoughtful 12-year-old who had been watching him carefully all evening. The question hit him like a physical blow. "No," he said quietly. "My wife and we wanted children, but it never happened. And then she got sick and—" He couldn't finish the sentence, but he didn't need to. Sister Maria's hand found his shoulder, a gentle touch that somehow anchored him. "I'm sorry," Elena said with a solemn sincerity that only children possessed. "But you know what? You're really good with us. Maybe God sent you here for a reason." Jonathan looked around the room at these 17 beautiful souls who had been abandoned, neglected, and forgotten by the world. Yet they radiated more joy and hope than he'd felt in years. They had nothing, yet they had everything that mattered. "Maybe he did," he whispered. As bedtime approached, the children began their nightly routine. Jonathan watched in fascination as they helped each other, older kids assisting younger ones, sharing toys and stories, creating a family unit that transcended blood relations. "Mr. Blackwood," Miguel tugged on his sleeve. "Will you read us a story?" Jonathan looked to Sister Maria, who nodded encouragingly. He found himself sitting in a circle with all 17 children, holding a worn copy of The Velveteen Rabbit, a story about becoming real through being loved. His voice was rusty at first, unused to the rhythms of children's literature. But as he read about the rabbit's journey from toy to living creature, his voice grew stronger, more confident. The children hung on every word, their eyes wide with wonder. "Real isn't how you are made," said the skin horse. "It's a thing that happens to you. When a child loves you for a long, long time, not just to play with, but really loves you, then you become real." As he read those words, Jonathan felt something shift inside his chest. For the first time in years, he felt real. Not the manufactured version of himself that he presented to the world, but the man he had been before grief and ambition had hardened his heart. After the story, as the children prepared for bed, Grace approached him with something clutched in her small hand. "This is for you," she said, pressing a crayon drawing into his palm. It showed a tall man in a suit standing next to a woman in black, surrounded by smiling children. At the top, in careful block letters, she had written "Our Family." Jonathan stared at the drawing, his vision blurring. "Thank you," he managed to say. "This is the most beautiful thing anyone has ever given me." As the children settled into their beds, Jonathan and Sister Maria stood in the doorway of the dormitory, watching over them like guardian angels. "They love you already," she said softly. "Children have a way of seeing straight to the heart of a person." "I don't deserve their love," he replied, his voice thick with emotion. "None of us deserve love," Sister Maria said, her hand finding his again. "That's what makes it grace." They stood in comfortable silence, two wounded souls who had found healing in the most unexpected place. Outside, the city hummed with its usual chaos, but inside this small sanctuary, peace reigned. "Sister Maria," Jonathan said finally, "I need to ask you something, and I need you to be honest with me." She turned to face him, her expression open and trusting. "Of course. When you look at me, what do you see?" She studied his face for a long moment, taking in the lines that worry and grief had etched there, the eyes that had seen too much pain, the mouth that had forgotten how to smile until tonight. "I see a man who's been hiding from himself for so long that he forgot who he really was," she said. "But I also see someone who's ready to remember. I see someone who's hungry for something real, something that matters. I see someone who's capable of great love, if he'll just let himself feel it." Her words broke something open inside him, not in a painful way, but like a dam releasing water that had been held back too long. For the first time since his wife's death, Jonathan Blackwood allowed himself to hope. "I want to be that man," he whispered. "I want to be the man these children see when they look at me." Sister Maria smiled, and in that smile, he saw forgiveness, acceptance, and the promise of redemption. "Then be him," she said simply. "Starting right now." As they walked back through the common room, Jonathan's phone buzzed with messages from his assistant, his board of directors, his lawyers. The world of mergers and acquisitions seemed like a distant planet compared to the universe he had discovered here. He silenced the phone and slipped it back into his pocket. For the first time in years, there was nowhere else he wanted to be. The morning sun cast long shadows across the construction site where St. Augustine's new wing was taking shape. Sister Maria stood among the workers, her heart swelling with hope as she watched the foundation being poured. For 3 weeks, her world had been transformed. The children were eating regular meals, the orphanage had new supplies, and Jonathan's construction crews were working around the clock to expand their facilities. She clutched the morning newspaper in her trembling hands, reading the headline for the 10th time: "Blackwood Industries under federal investigation. CEO suspected of embezzlement and fraud." "Sister Maria." Miguel's voice called from across the courtyard. At 8 years old, he had become her shadow, always eager to share news about their angel man who visited every day. "Mr. Jonathan is here." But when she looked up, she saw Jonathan approaching with a heaviness in his step she'd never witnessed before. His usual impeccable appearance was disheveled, his shirt wrinkled, his tie askew, and his eyes red-rimmed with exhaustion. "Jonathan," she said softly, folding the newspaper against her chest. "I've been praying for you." He stopped a few feet away, his jaw clenched tight. "Have you now? Even after reading that?" He nodded toward the paper she was trying to hide. "Especially after reading that." Her voice was steady, but her heart was racing. "I know you. I know your heart." "Do you?" His laugh was bitter, hollow. "Because apparently, the FBI doesn't think so. They froze all my accounts this morning. The construction has to stop. The food deliveries, everything has to stop." Sister Maria felt the blood drain from her face. "But surely this is just a misunderstanding." "Is it?" Jonathan's voice rose, causing several children playing nearby to look up with worried expressions. "Tell me, sister, what do you really know about the money I've been giving you?" The question hung in the air like a physical blow. Sister Maria opened her mouth to respond, but no words came. She had never asked where the money came from. She had been too grateful, too desperate to question the miracle that had saved her children. "I see," Jonathan continued, his voice turning cold. "You never wondered how I could write checks for millions without batting an eye. Never questioned why a man with my reputation would suddenly develop a conscience." "Jonathan, please." "The truth is, sister, I don't know if the money was clean." His voice cracked on the admission. "I've been so focused on trying to feel human again that I never stopped to think about the consequences. And now." He gestured toward the half-built wing, toward the children who had gathered to watch their conversation with growing concern. "Now I might have destroyed everything I was trying to build." Sister Maria took a step toward him, her hand outstretched. "We'll figure this out together." "No." He stepped back, his face hardening. There is no together, sister. There never was. I'm a billionaire, and you're a nun. I live in a penthouse, and you serve the poor. I was playing dress-up in your world, pretending I could be something I'm not. The words hit Sister Maria like physical blows. She had seen this before. People who pushed others away when they were afraid, who destroyed beautiful things rather than risk losing them slowly. That's not true, she said, her voice trembling. These past weeks, I've seen who you really are. You've seen who I wanted to be. Jonathan's voice echoed across the courtyard. But want and reality are two different things. I'm the Ice King of Wall Street, remember? I destroy things. It's what I do. Sister Maria felt tears threatening, but she refused to let them fall. The children love you. Grace drew you a picture yesterday. Miguel asks about you every morning. You've given them hope. I've given them false hope. His voice broke completely now. Don't you understand? If this money was stolen, if I took it from pension funds or charities, then I've made you complicit in my crimes. I've turned you into everything you've spent your life fighting against. The accusation hung between them like a chasm. Sister Maria felt her world tilting, the foundation of trust they'd built crumbling beneath her feet. She thought of the past 3 weeks, of the joy in the children's faces, of the pride she'd felt in what they'd accomplished together. Had it all been built on blood money? Get out, she whispered. Jonathan's face went pale. Maria. Get out. Her voice rose to a shout, surprising them both. If you believe so little in what we've built, if you think so little of me that you'd accuse me of being complicit in crimes, then leave. Take your money, take your guilt, and leave us alone. Sister Maria, Miguel's small voice came from behind her, confused and frightened. She turned to see all 17 children gathered there, their faces a mixture of confusion and fear. They had never seen her raise her voice, never seen her lose control. Grace clutched her drawing of Jonathan, tears streaming down her face. Go inside, Sister Maria said, her voice breaking. All of you. Now. As the children reluctantly filed past, Grace stopped beside Jonathan. Her small hand touched his arm, and she held up her drawing, a stick figure of him surrounded by hearts and flowers. Don't go away, angel man, she whispered. We need you. Jonathan's composure finally shattered. Tears streamed down his face as he knelt to Grace's level. I'm sorry, little one. I'm so sorry. When he looked up, Sister Maria was gone. Through the window, he could see her silhouette in the chapel, her shoulders shaking with sobs. Have you ever had to choose between protecting someone you love and standing by your principles? Share how you navigated that impossible decision. Jonathan stood alone in the courtyard, surrounded by the evidence of their shared dream, the half-built wing, the playground equipment, the garden they'd planted together. The construction workers had stopped their work, sensing the tension, and stood watching awkwardly. He pulled out his phone and made a call. Stop all work on the orphanage project. Immediately. As the workers began packing up their tools, Jonathan took one last look at the chapel window. Inside, he could see Sister Maria kneeling before the altar, and he knew she was praying for him even now, even after everything he'd said. The irony wasn't lost on him. In trying to protect her from his potential crimes, he had committed the greatest sin of all. He had crushed the spirit of the one person who had seen good in him. As he walked away from St. Augustine's for what he believed would be the last time, Jonathan Blackwood had never felt more alone. The ice around his heart, which had been slowly melting over the past 3 weeks, froze solid once again. Behind him, the sound of Sister Maria's sobs echoed through the chapel, a prayer of heartbreak that seemed to reach toward heaven itself. The rain had stopped, but the world outside St. Augustine's remained gray and heavy with unspoken sorrow. Jonathan sat in his Bentley across the street from the orphanage, the engine silent, his hands gripping the steering wheel until his knuckles went white. 3 days had passed since Sister Maria had walked out of his life, taking with her the only light he'd found in months of darkness. The manila envelope on his passenger seat contained the deed to the orphanage, purchased from the diocese that morning for $3 million. It also held architectural plans for renovations, a trust fund worth $50 million, and a letter he'd written and rewritten 17 times. His lawyers had called him insane. His board of directors had demanded explanations he couldn't give. But for the first time in his life, Jonathan Blackwood didn't care what anyone else thought. He thought about Elena's words from that terrible night, "You can't buy love, and you can't buy forgiveness." She had been right, of course. But maybe, just maybe, he could buy a chance to earn both. Inside the orphanage, Sister Maria knelt in the small chapel, her rosary beads clicking softly through her fingers. The children had eaten well for 3 days. Donations had mysteriously appeared at their door, enough to fill the pantry and then some. She suspected Jonathan's hand in it, but she had been too proud, too wounded to investigate. "Sister Maria?" Grace's small voice interrupted her prayer. The 7-year-old stood in the doorway, her dark eyes wide with concern. "Are you crying again?" Sister Maria touched her cheek, surprised to find it damp. "Just talking to God, mi amor." "Are you talking to him about the sad man?" "What sad man?" Grace pointed toward the window. "The one who's been sitting in the big car for an hour. He looks like he's been crying too." Sister Maria's heart stopped. She rose slowly, her joints protesting, and moved to the window. There, across the street, sat Jonathan's unmistakable black Bentley. Even from this distance, she could see his silhouette, motionless and heavy with grief. "CTA, have you ever had to choose between your pride and your heart? Share a moment when forgiveness felt impossible but necessary." Miguel appeared at her elbow, having followed Grace. "Sister, why is the soup man here? Are we in trouble?" "No, Mijo," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "We're not in trouble." But she was. She was in the kind of trouble that came from realizing you might have broken something precious in your determination to protect your dignity. She had seen the look in Jonathan's eyes that night, not just hurt, but devastation. The kind of devastation that came from having your one hope for redemption crumble in your hands. "Grace, Miguel, go help with lunch preparation," she said gently. "I'll be right back." Sister Maria walked to her small office and sat at her desk, staring at the phone. Jonathan's business card lay beside it, creased from being handled so many times. She had picked it up countless times over the past 3 days, only to put it down again. Pride, she realized, was a luxury she could no longer afford, not when it might cost her the chance to heal a wounded soul. Across the street, Jonathan's phone buzzed. He glanced at it, expecting another call from his office, but froze when he saw St. Augustine's on the display. His hand trembled as he answered. "Jonathan." Sister Maria's voice was soft, tentative. "Maria." Her name came out as a whisper, loaded with 3 days of longing and regret. "I can see you from my window." Jonathan looked toward the orphanage and saw her silhouette in a second-floor window. The distance between them felt insurmountable, but hearing her voice made his chest tight with hope. "I didn't know if you'd want to see me," he said. "I didn't know if I did either," she admitted. "But 17 children keep asking about their soup man, and I realized I was being selfish." "Selfish." Jonathan's voice cracked. "Maria, you're the least selfish person I've ever met." "I was protecting my pride instead of opening my heart," she said. "That's the worst kind of selfishness." Jonathan closed his eyes, overwhelmed by the grace in her words. "I have something for you. For the children. I don't know if you'll accept it, but—" "Come inside," she interrupted. "Whatever it is, we should talk face to face." The line went quiet for a moment. Then, "Are you sure?" "I'm sure." 10 minutes later, Jonathan stood in the orphanage's small entrance hall, the envelope clutched in his hands. He looked older than he had 3 days ago, his usual composure replaced by raw vulnerability. Sister Maria descended the stairs slowly, her heart pounding. They stood 3 feet apart, a distance that felt like an ocean. "I'm sorry," they said simultaneously, then shared a trembling laugh. "You first," Jonathan said. Sister Maria took a deep breath. "I'm sorry I judged you. I'm sorry I let my pride hurt you when you were trying to help. I'm sorry I made you feel like your pain didn't matter." Jonathan's eyes filled with tears. "I'm sorry I tried to buy your forgiveness. I'm sorry I pushed too hard, too fast. I'm sorry I made you feel like you owed me something when the truth is, I owe you everything." "What do you mean?" Jonathan extended the envelope with shaking hands. "You saved my life, Maria. You reminded me what it means to be human. You showed me that love isn't about what you can get, but what you can give." Sister Maria took the envelope, her fingers brushing his. The contact sent a jolt through both of them, not romantic, but something deeper. Recognition. Understanding. Forgiveness. "What is this?" she asked. "A choice," Jonathan said. "You can take it, or you can throw it away. But either way, I want you to know that knowing you, loving you, not romantically, but as a friend, as a fellow human being, has been the greatest gift of my life." Sister Maria opened the envelope, her eyes widening as she saw the contents. The deed, the architectural plans, the trust fund. It was more than she had ever dared dream of for the children. "Jonathan, this is..." She looked up at him, tears streaming down her face. "This is too much." "It's not enough," he said firmly. "It will never be enough for what you've given me." "And what's that?" Jonathan stepped closer, his voice dropping to a whisper. "Hope. Faith. The belief that maybe, just maybe, I can be the man Elena saw in me. The man you saw in me that night in the grocery store." Sister Maria set the envelope aside and did something that surprised them both. She reached out and took his hands in hers. They were cold, trembling, but she held them firmly. "You already are that man," she said. "You just forgot for a while." Jonathan broke then, the tears he'd been holding back for months finally flowing freely. Sister Maria didn't let go of his hands, didn't look away from his pain. She simply held him, the way she had held countless broken souls over the years. "What happens now?" he asked when he could speak again. "Now," she said, smiling through her own tears, "we figure out how to heal together." 6 months later, the morning sun streamed through the stained glass windows of St. Augustine's newly renovated chapel, casting rainbow patterns across the polished wooden pews. The sanctuary buzzed with quiet anticipation as friends, family, and children filled every seat. At the altar, Father Miguel, no longer the hungry boy who once asked if angels got hungry, stood in his pristine white vestments, his ordination certificate still bearing the creases from being held so tightly. Sister Maria sat in the front pew, her hands folded in her lap, watching the young man she'd helped raise prepare for his first Mass as a priest. Her habit was new, a gift from the Blackwood Foundation, but her smile was the same radiant beacon it had always been. Beside her sat Jonathan, no longer the hollow-eyed billionaire from that grocery store encounter, but a man transformed by purpose and love. "Are you ready for this?" he whispered, squeezing her hand gently. "I've been ready for 40 years, she replied, her voice thick with emotion. "But I never imagined I'd get to see it." The past 6 months had been a whirlwind of change. The Blackwood Foundation had not only rebuilt St. Augustine's, but had established a network of community centers across the city. Jonathan had thrown himself into the work with the same intensity he'd once reserved for corporate takeovers, but this time, he was building up rather than tearing down. The children, their children, as they'd come to think of them, had flourished. Grace was now in advanced placement classes, her art displayed in the foundation's main lobby. Little Tommy had overcome his stutter through speech therapy Jonathan had personally funded. Each success felt like a miracle, but Sister Maria knew better. They weren't miracles, they were the natural result of love given freely. What's the most meaningful transformation you've witnessed in someone's life? Share how love and support can change everything. Father Miguel began the processional, his voice carrying across the sanctuary with newfound confidence. Dearly beloved, we are gathered here today not just to celebrate the Eucharist, but to witness the power of grace in action. As the Mass progressed, Jonathan found himself thinking about that night in the grocery store. He'd gone there searching for a reason to feel human again, and he'd found so much more. He'd found family. He'd found purpose. He'd found love, not the romantic kind, but something deeper and more enduring. During the homily, Father Miguel spoke about unexpected encounters and divine appointments. Sometimes God uses the most ordinary moments to orchestrate the most extraordinary miracles, he said, his eyes finding Jonathan and Sister Maria in the front row. A chance meeting in a grocery store. A moment of desperation that becomes a moment of grace. A theft that becomes a gift. The congregation murmured in recognition. The story of the billionaire and the nun had become legend in their community, but those who lived it knew the truth was far more beautiful than any tale. After the service, the community center's dining hall overflowed with celebration. Children who once went hungry now laughed over plates piled high with food. Former gang members who'd found purpose in the Foundation's job training program served as mentors to younger kids. The elderly, no longer isolated in their apartments, shared stories with teenagers who actually listened. Jonathan stood at the edge of the room, watching the controlled chaos with deep satisfaction. Sister Maria approached, carrying 2 cups of coffee. "Penny for your thoughts?" she asked, offering him a cup. "Just thinking about how different things might have been if I'd called security that night instead of." He paused, searching for the right words. "Instead of seeing me as a person instead of a problem?" Sister Maria finished gently. "Instead of letting you see me as a person too," Jonathan corrected. "I was the one who needed saving, sister. You just happened to be the instrument God used." She smiled, the expression transforming her weathered face. "I think we saved each other, my friend." Across the room, Grace, now 15 and radiant with possibility, approached them with a canvas tucked under her arm. "I finished it," she announced shyly, revealing a painting of that fateful night in the grocery store. But instead of showing the theft, she'd painted the moment of recognition between Jonathan and Sister Maria, the instant when 2 strangers became family. "It's beautiful, Mija," Sister Maria breathed, tears streaming down her cheeks. Jonathan stared at the painting, seeing himself through Grace's eyes, not as the cold businessman he'd once been, but as someone capable of love and transformation. "May I?" he asked, reaching for the canvas. As he held the painting, Jonathan felt the weight of the past 6 months. The late nights spent planning community programs. The joy of watching children discover their talents. The profound satisfaction of using his wealth to build rather than destroy. The unexpected family he'd found in the most unlikely place. "You know what the best part is," he said softly. "What's that?" Sister Maria asked. "Miguel was right that day. Angels do get hungry." He looked at her with eyes bright with unshed tears. "They get hungry for love, for purpose, for the chance to make a difference. And sometimes, God uses a grocery store to feed them." The evening wound down with Father Miguel's blessing over the assembled community. As people began to leave, Jonathan found himself alone with Sister Maria in the chapel where it all began, where he'd first brought her after that transformative night. "I have something for you," he said, reaching into his jacket pocket. "Jonathan, you've already given me more than I could ever." "This isn't from me," he interrupted gently, producing a small velvet box. "This is from Sarah." Sister Maria's breath caught. Sarah, his late wife, whose death had driven him to that grocery store in the first place. She took the box with trembling hands and opened it to reveal a simple gold cross necklace. She wanted it to go to someone who would understand its true value, Jonathan explained. Someone who knew that love isn't measured in dollars and cents, but in sacrifices made and lives touched. Sister Maria held the cross up to the light, watching it catch the glow from the altar candles. "I can't accept this." You already have, Jonathan said softly. You accepted at the moment you chose to love 17 children more than your own reputation. You accepted it when you saw past my wealth to the broken man underneath. You accepted it when you taught me that the only currency that matters is love. She clasped the necklace around her neck, feeling its weight settle against her heart. What happens now? Jonathan smiled, the first truly free smile he'd worn in years. Now we keep building. We keep loving. We keep proving that God can use even the most unlikely encounters to change the world. As they walked out of the chapel together, Sister Maria noticed the small plaque Jonathan had installed by the door, in memory of a grocery store encounter that changed everything. May all who enter here find the love they're hungry for. Outside, the city hummed with life, but their small corner of the world had been transformed. Where once there had been desperation and judgment, now there was hope and grace. Where once there had been two strangers from different worlds, now there was family. The greatest theft had indeed been stealing dignity, but the greatest gift was love, freely given, freely received, and freely multiplied until it filled every corner of their lives. And in that multiplication, both Jonathan and Sister Maria had found what they'd been searching for all along, not just the feeling of being human, but the joy of being fully alive. This story shows how one moment of compassion can transform multiple lives. What's one act of kindness you could do today that might change someone's world? Share your commitment to love in action below.